Chapter 1: Thresholds. You learn things squatting. You learn which parts of the city sleep soundest, which shadows stretch longest, which locks yield to patience and a sliver of metal. You learn the rhythm of patrols, the smell of imminent eviction, the subtle language of decay that tells you if a place is truly empty or just waiting. Mostly, you learn about cold. Cold seeping up from concrete, cold biting through inadequate layers, cold settling deep in your bones until you feel less like a person and more like a poorly insulated pipe. That's why the house felt like a miracle. We found it tucked away on a forgotten street, squeezed between a boarded-up laundromat and a warehouse whose corrugated metal sides wept rust. It wasn't grand, not like some of the mansions Carver scoped out closer to the park, places with too many eyes, too many alarms. This was just a house. 2 stories, peeling paint the color of faded bruises, windows dark and blank like cataracts. But it had a roof. It had walls. And crucially, the back door lock was a joke. There were 5 of us then, a loose constellation of desperation drawn together by the gravity of shared misfortune. Brick Bari Kaksmirk was our unofficial anchor, built like the foundations he used to lay, all solid mass and quiet competence. He'd lost his contracting business, then his home, then drifted like so much other debris washed up on the city's shores. He assessed the house with a professional eye, running thick fingers over door jambs, testing floorboards with a heavy boot. Solid enough was his verdict, which felt like a blessing. Patch Maya Singh trailed him, her worn backpack stuffed with scavenged medical supplies. She used to be halfway through paramedic training before life took a detour through hell. Now she patched up scraped knees, infected cuts, and the deeper, less visible wounds we all carried. Her eyes, dark and perpetually tired, missed nothing. Carver, just Carver, nobody asked for more, moved like smoke at the edges of the group. Wiry, watchful, with hands that knew their way around the cheap hunting knife he kept sharp. He said little, his silence a heavy thing that discouraged questions. He claimed the smallest, most defensible room upstairs almost immediately, a territorial instinct kicking in. And then there was Mercy, Sister Agnes before. Well, before. Small, frail, bundled in layers of mismatched clothing, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched around surprisingly sharp blue eyes. She ended up on the streets after her convent, crumbling and broke, finally closed its doors. She carried an aura of displaced piety, murmuring prayers that seemed aimed more at warding off the present than invoking any future salvation. Me, I'm Kenji Tanaka. They call me Glitch. Because I'm good with electronics, salvaged laptops, cracked phones, anything with a circuit board. I can coax Wi-Fi from hostile networks, bypass security systems, make dead things blink back to life sometimes. And because maybe I'm a bit broken myself. My obsession is patterns, order mapping the chaos. In the shifting landscape of street life, knowing the layout, the system, is survival. I carried my battered tablet, solar charger, and a precious cache of drawing supplies like holy relics. This house, I thought, I could map this. I could make it make sense. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust, old wood, and something else. A faint, underlying scent that reminded me of ozone after a lightning strike or damp earth. It wasn't unpleasant, just strange. The layout was conventional enough at first glance. Downstairs, living room choked with dust-sheeted furniture like huddled ghosts, a dining room with a skeletal table, a kitchen grimed with years of neglect. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms, a bathroom with rust-stained porcelain, and a narrow hallway. We claimed our spaces. Brick took the largest bedroom, Patch the one next door. Carver had his small fortress. Mercy chose a corner of the living room downstairs, near a grimy window, arranging her few belongings with quiet dignity. I set up my tech station in the dining room, the large table perfect for spreading out my salvaged gear and eventual maps. The first oddity was small. I was setting up my tablet, plugging the solar charger into the portable battery pack when I noticed the light switch by the dining room door. Standard toggle switch, yellowed plastic. I looked away, fiddling with a frayed USB cable. When I looked back, it was a push-button switch. The old, round kind. I blinked, shook my head, must have misremembered. Stress, exhaustion, they play tricks on your perception. I made a note, sketched the push-button switch onto the first page of my notebook dedicated to this house. Entry point survey dining room. Later that evening, Patch was trying to heat water on a camping stove in the kitchen. She called out, frustrated. "Anyone seen the kettle? I swear I saw one on the counter earlier." Nobody had. We searched the dusty cupboards, the sticky drawers. No kettle. Patch frowned. "Maybe I imagined it." "Place plays tricks," Carver muttered from the doorway, cleaning his knife with a slow, deliberate motion. That night the cold was less severe than usual, buffered by 4 walls and a mostly intact roof. I drifted off on my sleeping bag, the tablet charging beside me, sketching the initial downstairs layout in my mind. Hallway, living room left, dining room right, kitchen straight back. A sound woke me, a low, grinding noise, like stone on stone but muffled deep within the house's structure. It lasted only a few seconds, then silence. I lay there, heart pounding, listening. The house settled. Floorboards creaked overhead. The wind sighed outside, nothing more. In the morning, the first truly undeniable thing happened. I woke stiffly, the gray dawn light filtering through the grimy dining room window. I needed the bathroom upstairs. I walked into the hallway, stared. Yesterday, the stairs had been straight ahead from the front door, leading up along the right-hand wall. This morning, they were on the left. I froze, my brain doing frantic cartwheels. Had I come out of the dining room wrong? Was I disoriented? I walked back into the dining room, looked out into the hall again. No mistake. The staircase was definitively on the left side of the hallway now, ascending along the opposite wall. The space where it had been was now just a blank wall, the plaster seamless, bearing the same pattern of water stains as the rest of the hall. My breath hitched. I pulled out my tablet, hands shaking slightly, and opened my preliminary sketch. A straight staircase, right side. I took a photo of the current hallway with the tablet's camera. Left side. Time-stamped. Brick, my voice was higher than intended. He emerged from the living room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What?" "The stairs," I pointed, unable to articulate more. Brick frowned, looked at the stairs, then back at me. "Yeah, what about 'em?" "They were on the other side, yesterday." He squinted at the stairs, then the wall. He rubbed his jaw, his expression unreadable. "You sure glitch. Long night." "I mapped it," I insisted, holding up the tablet, showing him the sketch, then the photo. Look. He peered at the screen. He looked at the stairs again. He walked over, ran his hand along the blank wall where the stairs should have been. He knocked on it solid. He turned back, his usual certainty replaced by a flicker of something else. Unease. Huh. Patch came down, drawn by the voices. Mercy emerged from her corner, clutching a worn rosary. Carver appeared silently at the top of the new stairs, watching us. "The house," I whispered, the faint ozone smell seeming stronger now. "It changed." Carver's eyes, dark and unreadable, swept over the hallway, lingering on the blank wall. He didn't look surprised. He looked wary, like an animal sensing a predator it couldn't yet see. Patch's face was pale. "The kettle," she murmured, "the light switch." Mercy made the sign of the cross, her lips moving silently. Brick just stood there, staring at the staircase that had swapped sides overnight, his solid presence seeming, for the first time, entirely inadequate. The house was quiet, but it felt awake, attentive, like it had just shown us its first, unsettling trick and was waiting to see what we'd do next. My mapping project suddenly felt less like an exercise in reclaiming order, and more like documenting the advance of something deeply, fundamentally wrong. The cold I felt now had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the cold of realizing the floor beneath your feet wasn't stable, that the walls holding up the roof might not be walls tomorrow, that the very geometry of your shelter was hostile. Thresholds. We had crossed one getting into the house. Now it felt like the house itself was crossing thresholds within its own impossible existence and dragging us along with it. Chapter 2: Dead Reckoning. The immediate aftermath of the staircase incident, as I'd already mentally labeled it, was a flurry of nervous energy. Brick, ever the pragmatist, conducted a thorough sweep of the house, tapping walls, checking windows, looking for hidden mechanisms, sliding panels, anything that could explain the shift through conventional means. He found nothing but dust, decay, and solid construction. Too solid, maybe. The wall where the stairs used to be felt unnervingly permanent, as if it had always been there. Patch, her medical instincts kicking in, checked us all for disorientation, asking about headaches, dizziness. Were we hallucinating? Carbon monoxide. She sniffed the air critically, but there was no smell of gas, only that persistent, faint electric earth scent. We were all shaken but lucid. Mercy retreated deeper into her prayers, her rosary beads clicking like tiny, worried insects. Carver just watched. He cleaned his knife again, his movements economical and precise. He seemed less disturbed by the impossibility of it, and more focused on assessing a new kind of threat. Like the shifting stairs were just another predator in the urban jungle, one that required a different kind of vigilance. I threw myself into mapping. It was my defense mechanism, my way of imposing order on the encroaching strangeness. If the house changed, I would document the changes. I would find the pattern. There had to be a pattern. Randomness on this scale felt unnatural. Even chaos has underlying principles, doesn't it? I started with a fresh page in my notebook, supplementing it with the tablet. Detailed floor plans, measurements painstakingly taken with a salvaged tape measure Brick unearthed from his toolbox. I noted the position of every door, every window, every light switch, confirming the dining room one was still the old push-button style. I took photos, time-stamped everything. I created redundant digital backups on a scavenged USB drive I kept tethered around my neck. The first few days were deceptively quiet. No major architectural rearrangements, just small things. A window in the living room that seemed slightly wider one afternoon. A cupboard in the kitchen that refused to open one morning, then swung freely an hour later. A persistent draft from a solid wall upstairs. Patch swore a crack in the bathroom mirror changed shape overnight. Minor glitches, easily dismissed as tricks of light, faulty memory, settling foundations. But I documented them all. Living room window width, 10,001.2 m, 1430, 1.3 m, remeasure. Kitchen cupboard C, stuck 0800, open 0915. Bathroom mirror crack, see photo timestamps alpha 03, alpha 04. My notes grew increasingly detailed, sprinkled with question marks and self-doubt. Was I becoming obsessed, seeing patterns where none existed? Brick tried to establish routines, safety protocols. Nobody goes anywhere alone, especially upstairs. We keep track of each other. Sound off every hour if you're separated. He tried to reinforce the back door, but the wood around the frame seemed unusually dense, resisting his drill bit. Carver mostly ignored the protocols, moving through the house with a disconcerting silence. He spent hours just sitting in different rooms, utterly still, watching, listening. Once I found him staring intently at a section of wall in the upstairs hallway, his head cocked slightly. "Hear something?" I asked, keeping my distance. He didn't look at me. "The walls," he breathed, barely audible. "They ain't empty." A shiver traced its way down my spine. I started listening too. And beneath the normal sounds, the wind, the settling groans, Patch humming nervously in the kitchen, there was something else. A faint, intermittent rustling. A soft, dragging sound like heavy fabric being pulled across rough wood. It seemed to come from within the walls themselves. That's when I started noticing the bulges, small at first. A section of wallpaper in the living room near Mercy's corner that seemed slightly convex, pushing outwards. A ripple in the plaster near the ceiling in my dining room workspace. They were subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking, but I was looking. I measured them, photographed them. Sometimes they'd vanish by the next day, the surface smooth again. Other times they'd migrate, appearing a few feet away. The wall stalker. The name formed in my mind, unbidden. Something lived or moved or existed within the very fabric of the house. Patch felt it too. "It feels like being watched," she confessed one evening, her voice low. "Even when I'm alone in my room, like eyes pressing on the back of my neck." She'd taken to sleeping with a heavy wrench beside her sleeping bag. Mercy's prayers grew more specific, less about general salvation, more like exorcism rites whispered under her breath. She claimed shadows in the corners of her vision flickered with unnatural speed, coalescing and dispersing faster than logic allowed. She started tracing protective symbols in the dust on the floor around her sleeping area, symbols Carver eyed with suspicion. My mapping became frantic. If the house changed, the changes had to originate somewhere, follow some rule. Was it time-based, tied to occupancy, triggered by specific actions? I set up my tablet on a tripod, running a time-lapse recording of the main hallway. I placed small, motion-activated sensors salvaged from defunct security systems in key locations. I tried correlating the minor shifts with weather patterns, lunar cycles, ambient noise levels. Nothing. No discernible pattern emerged. The house rearranged itself on its own inscrutable schedule. One afternoon, I was meticulously measuring the upstairs hallway, humming a tuneless song to ward off the oppressive silence. I noted the position of Carver's door, Patch's door, Brick's door, 3 doors along the right wall, a window at the far end. Simple. I turned to measure the width of the hall. When I turned back, seconds later, there were 4 doors on the right. My tape measure clattered to the floor. 4 doors. The original 3 and a 4th one nestled between Patches and Bricks. It was identical to the others, plain wood, tarnished brass knob, painted the same peeling off-white. It looked like it had always been there. My heart hammered against my ribs. I backed away slowly, fumbling for my tablet, took a picture. Timestamp 1542. Checked my earlier photos. 1530, 3 doors. Where did it come from? Where did it go? Brick came upstairs, hearing the tape measure fall. Glitch, problem. I pointed, speechless. Brick saw the 4th door. His face tightened. He walked towards it cautiously. Anyone check this? Patch appeared from her room, door number 2. Check what? She saw the extra door. Her hand flew to her mouth. Carver emerged from his room, door number 1, drawn by the commotion. He looked at the 4th door, then at us, his expression unreadable. Mercy was downstairs, thankfully. I didn't want her seeing this. Right, Brick said, his voice tight. Nobody opens it, not yet. He tried the knob, locked solid. He put his ear to the wood, listened intently, shook his head. Nothing. It wasn't there, Patch whispered. Kenji, it wasn't there 10 minutes ago. I know, I said, my voice strained. My meticulously drawn map, my digital records, they felt like children's drawings against this impossible reality. Dead reckoning. That's what sailors used when they lost sight of land, navigating by calculation and guesswork. That's what we were doing now. Guessing. Calculating based on rules that kept changing, and rapidly running out of known points. Carver stepped forward, pushing past Brick. Stand back. Before anyone could object, he raised his heavy boot and kicked the door hard, right below the knob. The wood splintered with a sickening crack. He kicked again, and the door shuddered inwards, hanging open on a broken lock. The room beyond was small, completely empty. Bare floorboards, blank walls, no windows, except the back wall wasn't blank. It was covered floor to ceiling in sketches, charcoal drawings, frantic and overlapping, sketches of us. There was Brick, his face drawn with lines of worry. Patch tending to an unseen wound. Mercy kneeling in prayer. Carver sharpening his knife. Me hunched over my tablet. Dozens of images capturing small moments from the past few days, rendered with chilling accuracy. And in the center of the wall, larger than the rest, was a single, perfectly drawn, wide-open eye, staring directly out of the wall, staring directly at us. The air in the tiny room was freezing cold, carrying that faint ozone scent, stronger here than anywhere else. Beneath the eye, scrawled in the same charcoal, were two words. I see. Silence descended on the hallway, thick and suffocating. The rustling within the walls seemed louder now, a sibilant whisper surrounding us. The house wasn't just changing, it was learning, it was watching, and it was letting us know. My carefully constructed maps, my attempts at logic, felt utterly futile. We weren't mapping a house. We were trapped inside the observer. Chapter 3: Personal Spaces. The discovery of the observation room, as I morbidly dubbed it, shattered the fragile semblance of normalcy we'd clung to. The blatant declaration, "I see," and the unnervingly accurate sketches confirmed our deepest fear. The house wasn't just a shifting architectural anomaly. It was aware, sentient, and its attention was focused squarely on us. Brick, visibly shaken, boarded up the broken door to the observation room with salvaged planks, his hammer blows echoing through the tense silence. It felt like a futile gesture, like trying to blindfold a god, but the act itself seemed necessary. A small assertion of defiance against the impossible. Afterward, he seemed diminished, his usual stoic presence eroded by a creeping dread. The house was playing by rules he didn't understand, negating his strength, his experience. His greatest fear, instability, failure, was being made manifest not just in shifting walls, but in his own eroding authority. He started double-checking his knots, retesting floorboards obsessively, as if searching for a flaw he could fix. Carver grew even more withdrawn, more suspicious. If the house saw everything, did it see his thoughts too? His past? Whatever shadows chased him seemed to lengthen within these walls. He spent less time watching the house and more time watching us, his eyes lingering on Brick's attempts at leadership, on my frantic note-taking, on Patch's interactions with Mercy. The house didn't need to create conflict. It just needed to amplify the existing fractures. His fear of betrayal festered, and the house seemed to oblige. Doors would click shut behind him unexpectedly. Floorboards would creak just outside his chosen territory. Once, he swore he heard his name whispered from an empty room, sounding chillingly like Brick's voice. Mercy retreated further into her faith, but it seemed less a shield now and more a desperate plea. The house's attention on her felt mocking. One morning, the grimy window near her sleeping area had rearranged its pattern of dirt and condensation to vaguely resemble a distorted crucifix, upside down. Another time, the water stains on the ceiling above her formed a leering, vaguely demonic face that vanished when Patch came over to look. She started having nightmares, waking with muffled cries, speaking of chapels with walls that bled and altars made of shifting, geometric shapes that induced vertigo. Her fear of blasphemy, of her faith failing her, was becoming her personal torment. Patch, our resilient medic, found her own fears weaponized. Her innate fear of disease and infection, amplified by the grim realities of street medicine, became the house's playground. One room upstairs, previously empty, shifted overnight. When she hesitantly pushed the door open, she recoiled, gagging. The room was coated in a thick, poolsing, reddish-black slime that smelled metallic, like old blood and decay. It clung to the walls, dripped from the ceiling, pooled on the floor. In the center, a rusted metal gurney, identical to those in her paramedic training ER, stood expectantly. The room vanished the next day, replaced by a simple linen closet, but the visceral horror lingered. She started washing her hands raw, obsessively cleaning her meager supplies, jumping at every strange stain or patch of damp. The house knew her fear of contamination, of helplessness in the face of sickness. And me, Glitch, my fear wasn't spiders or heights or the dark. It was the loss of control, the failure of logic, the inability to understand the system. My technology, my mapping, my patterns, these were my anchors in a chaotic world. So the house targeted them. My tablet started glitching, appropriately enough. The screen would flicker, displaying static or corrupted images of my maps. The battery drained inexplicably fast, even when connected to the fully charged power bank. Files became corrupted or vanished entirely, only to reappear later, sometimes subtly altered. Was it the house's influence, or was I just losing my mind, making mistakes in my desperation? The ambiguity was torture. One afternoon, I was trying to triangulate the source of the rustling within the walls using a salvaged microphone connected to my laptop. The audio feed was just white noise, then a burst of static, then my own voice, whispering calculations, coordinates, fragments of my mapping notes, followed by distorted, chuckling laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I ripped the headphones off, my skin crawling. The recording, when I dared to play it back, was just silence. The house wasn't just rearranging space. It was rearranging my perception, my confidence, my sanity. It used my own tools, my own obsession against me. It fed on my need for order by presenting ultimate, unsolvable chaos. The shifts became more targeted, more malicious, less like random glitches, more like deliberate traps. One evening, Brick was heading downstairs. He reached the landing, took a step, and the stair beneath him simply wasn't there. It had shortened, recessed into the wall by a crucial 6 inches. He tumbled, crashing down the last few steps with a pained grunt. Patch rushed to him. Thankfully, just bruises and a wrenched shoulder, but it was a clear warning. Brick's confidence, his physical surety, was an illusion here. Another time, Carver was stalking the upstairs hallway. As he passed the boarded-up observation room, one of the planks silently slid aside, revealing a sliver of darkness. He spun around, knife drawn, but there was nothing there. Just the feeling of being watched, amplified tenfold. The house was playing with him, prodding his paranoia. These weren't random structural failures. This was targeted harassment. Psychological warfare waged with plaster and shifting dimensions. The worst incident for me personally happened late one night. I was asleep in the dining room, my setup spread around me. I woke suddenly, not to a sound, but to a change. The quality of the darkness felt different, denser. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicked it on. The dining room was gone. I wasn't in the dining room anymore. I was in a narrow, cramped space. Roughly built walls of bare, splintery wood pressed in on all sides. The ceiling was low, barely inches above my head. It felt like being inside a coffin or a poorly constructed packing crate. My gear, the tablet, the notebooks, the charger was gone. My sleeping bag was gone. There was only me, the flashlight, and the suffocating closeness of the wooden walls. Panic clawed at my throat. I banged on the walls, solid. No doors, no windows, just endless, rough-hewn wood. The air was stale, thick. I shone the flashlight beam around frantically. And then I saw it, scratched into the wood directly in front of my face as if by fingernails. No pattern, only walls. My breath hitched. My carefully constructed theories, my search for logic, the house mocked them directly. It wasn't a puzzle to be solved. It was a prison designed by madness itself. I started shouting, banging on the walls, calling for Brick, for Patch, for anyone. My voice sounded small, absorbed by the wood. How long had I been here? How long would I be here? Would the walls start closing in? Was this my observation room, my personal hell? Minutes stretched into an eternity. The flashlight beam started to flicker. Low battery, of course. My carefully charged batteries, my backups all gone. Just this one failing light. Just as the beam died, plunging me into absolute, suffocating darkness, I heard it, faintly from far away, Brick's voice. Glitch, where are you? Sound off. Here, I screamed, pounding futilely. I'm trapped in the wall. More shouting, footsteps muffled. Then directly above me a heavy thudding sound, like an axe hitting wood. Splinters rained down on my head. A crack of light appeared. Then another blow and a section of the low ceiling splintered inwards. Brick's face appeared in the opening, illuminated by his own flashlight, grimed with sweat and dust. Found you. Hold still. He and Carver, working together with a pry bar and Brick's emergency axe, ripped open the top of my wooden prison. Hands reached down, hauled me out. I wasn't in a wall. I was back in the dining room, or a dining room. It looked mostly the same, but my gear was scattered haphazardly. The section they'd broken through. It looked like the underside of the dining room table, which was now inexplicably upside down, resting on its surface like a giant wooden beetle. The walls of my prison had been the table's legs and underside frame. How had I ended up inside an overturned table, convinced I was sealed within the walls? Patch checked me over, her hands trembling slightly. Mercy offered me water, her eyes filled with pity and fear. Carver watched me, his expression calculating. Had I lost it? Was I becoming unreliable? Brick clapped a heavy hand on my good shoulder, the other still sore from his fall. Stay sharp, kid, this place. It gets in your head. But it was more than that. It wasn't just in my head. It was in the wood, in the plaster, in the shifting dimensions. It knew us. It knew our breaking points. And it was systematically, patiently pushing us towards them. The observation room wasn't just one place. The entire house was an observation room, and the experiment was entering a new, more invasive phase. Chapter 4: Fractures. The house didn't need to tear us apart physically. It was doing a fine job tearing us apart mentally, exploiting the hairline cracks in our forced camaraderie until they widened into chasms. Trust, already a scarce commodity among a group of desperate strangers, began to evaporate like morning mist in a harsh sun. The house fed on our suspicion, our resentment, our fear of each other. Carver was the first fault line to buckle under the pressure. His paranoia, stoked by the house's personalized torments, the whispers, the moving shadows, the violations of his claimed space, found a target: me. It happened after another failed mapping attempt. I'd spent hours trying a new system, using colored chalk dust sprinkled in doorways to see if shifts left residue trails, placing tiny mirrors at hallway intersections to catch reflections of changing spaces. It was useless. The dust vanished without explanation. The mirrors showed nothing but fleeting, distorted reflections that might have been movement or just tricks of the light. Frustrated, I slumped against a wall, head in my hands. Carver appeared, emerging silently from the gloom at the end of the hall. He'd been watching me. "Still playing with your toys, Glitch." His voice was soft but edged with something sharp. "Trying to figure this place out," I muttered, too tired to be intimidated. "Same as always." "Or maybe," Carver stepped closer, his eyes narrowed, "maybe you already know. Maybe all this," he gestured vaguely at my scattered notes and chalk lines, "is just a show." I straightened up. "What are you talking about?" "The shifts, they always seem to benefit you, don't they? You get trapped, we rescue you. We get messed with, you're conveniently somewhere else. Mapping." He spat the word like it was an obscenity. "How do we know you're not doing this? Making it happen?" The accusation hung in the air, absurd and poisonous. "That's crazy, Carver. How could I possibly?" "You're the tech guy," he interrupted, stepping closer still, his hand resting near the hilt of his knife. "Good with tricks. Maybe this whole house is just one big trick. Your trick." Brick lumbered into the hallway, drawn by the raised voices. "Carver, back off. Glitch is trying to help." Carver didn't take his eyes off me. "Is he? Or is he leading us around by the nose while this place picks us off?" He glanced towards the boarded-up observation room. "It knows us. Maybe 'cause he told it." The implication was monstrous, that I was somehow allied with the house, feeding it information, orchestrating the terror. It was insane, but in this house, sanity was a rapidly depreciating currency. I saw a flicker of doubt in Brick's eyes before he suppressed it. Patch, who had appeared behind Brick, looked horrified. "Carver, stop it," Patch said, her voice trembling slightly. "This place is doing this to us, not Kenji." "You sure about that?" Carver sneered, finally looking away from me, his gaze sweeping over them with contempt. "Keep trusting him, see where it gets you." He turned and stalked away, melting back into the shadows. The confrontation left a toxic residue. The seed of suspicion had been planted. Even if Brick and Patch didn't consciously believe Carver, the question lingered. Could one of us be responsible? Could the house corrupt one of us, turn us into its agent? Suddenly, every shared glance felt weighted, every quiet conversation potentially suspect. The house seemed to revel in this new dynamic. The shifts became subtly divisive. Resources, Patch's dwindling medical supplies, our carefully rationed food packs, Brick's essential tools, would vanish from one person's area only to reappear, sometimes damaged, near someone else's. Carver found one of his spare knives, a smaller one he kept hidden, lying conspicuously near my sleeping bag. I found a page ripped from Mercy's worn Bible tucked under my tablet. Small, insidious acts of sabotage, designed to fray nerves and point fingers. Brick tried to hold us together, organizing work details, rationing supplies fairly, insisting on group check-ins. But his authority felt increasingly hollow. He was a builder in a house that defied construction, a leader whose followers were succumbing to paranoia. His own fear manifested as frustration, bursts of anger directed not at us, but at the house itself. He spent an entire afternoon attacking a wall that had inexplicably sealed off the pantry, his axe biting uselessly into plaster that seemed to harden and repair itself almost as fast as he struck it, the architectural antibody in action. He finally gave up, exhausted and defeated, the wall mockingly smooth and solid. Patch bore the brunt of the physical toll. Brick's wrenched shoulder needed tending. Carver got a nasty gash on his arm from a window that slammed shut on him unexpectedly. Mercy tripped on a floorboard that suddenly warped upwards, bruising her hip badly. Patch's supplies dwindled alarmingly. She confessed to me one night, her voice barely a whisper, that she was reusing bandages, sterilizing them as best she could with boiled water. If anyone gets a serious infection, Kenji, I don't know what I'll do. The house wasn't just attacking our minds. It was systematically weakening our bodies, making us more vulnerable. Her fear of helplessness was becoming a grim reality. Mercy grew quieter, seemingly retreating into a world only she could perceive. She stopped talking about the blasphemous visions, but her eyes held a haunted look. She spent hours staring at blank walls, her lips moving silently. Sometimes she'd trace patterns in the air, her fingers following invisible lines. Was she communicating with something, or had she simply broken under the strain? Her detachment was almost as unnerving as Carver's paranoia. The wall stalker became bolder. The rustling and dragging sounds were now almost constant, a subterranean rumor beneath the house's deceptive skin. We started catching fleeting glimpses, something pale and sinuous disappearing around a corner, a momentary bulge in the wall that seemed to track our movements, the distinct impression of pressure against a door, as if something heavy was leaning on the other side. It never fully revealed itself, remaining a terrifying potential, a presence felt more than seen. It was the house's primary weapon, deployed not for direct assault, but for constant, nerve-shredding pressure. One evening, we were huddled in the living room, the meager light of a couple of camping lanterns pushing back the oppressive gloom. A fragile truce held, born of shared exhaustion. Suddenly, a section of the ceiling directly above us began to bulge downwards, plaster cracking, dust raining down. It lowered rapidly like a descending press. We scrambled back, shouting in alarm. The bulge stopped barely 5 feet from the floor, pulsating slightly, the texture of the plaster disturbingly skin-like. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it retracted, smoothing back into the ceiling, leaving only a network of fresh cracks and a shower of plaster dust. We stared at the ceiling, hearts pounding. It hadn't tried to crush us, not directly. It had just demonstrated its power, showed us how easily it could. Carver laughed, a harsh, grating sound devoid of humor. "See, it's playing with us, like cats with mice." He looked directly at me again, his eyes glittering in the lantern light. "And someone let the cat in." Brick started to object, but his voice lacked conviction. Patch turned away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Mercy rocked back and forth, whispering unintelligibly. The fractures were deepening. Carver's accusation, Brick's wanting authority, Patch's desperation, Mercy's withdrawal, my own obsessive, failing attempts at understanding. The house was methodically breaking us down, isolating us even while we huddled together in the same shifting prison. It wasn't just the walls that were rearranging themselves. It was us. Our relationships, our trust, our very sense of self. and I had the horrifying feeling that the house was only just getting started. The foundation of our small group was crumbling, and I didn't see any way to repair it before the whole structure came crashing down. Chapter 5: Checkmate. The house had been prodding, testing, weakening us. Now it decided to make a decisive move. It wasn't content with mere harassment or psychological warfare anymore. It wanted to inflict damage. It wanted checkmate. It happened during what passed for night in that perpetual twilight zone. A storm raged outside, wind howling, rain lashing against the windows that sometimes seemed to multiply or change shape with the flashes of lightning. We were mostly gathered in the living room, seeking frail comfort in proximity. Carver, predictably, lurked near the main hallway entrance, unwilling to be cornered. The shift began not with a grinding sound, but with a sudden, sickening lurch, like the entire house had dropped a few inches. Lanterns rattled, dust showered down. Mercy cried out, clutching her chest. Before the dust even settled, the rearrangement started, faster and more violent than anything we'd experienced before. Walls didn't just shift, they slammed into new positions with percussive force. Doorways didn't just appear, they yawned open or sealed shut with the speed of slamming vault doors. The floor beneath us bucked and warped. It wasn't a rearrangement, it was a geological upheaval condensed into domestic space. Panic erupted. Brick bellowed orders lost in the cacophony. Patch scrambled to check on Mercy. I instinctively tried to grab my tablet, my anchor, but the table it rested on slid away, vanishing into a newly formed alcove. The living room itself began to constrict. The wall opposite the boarded-up fireplace rushed inwards, the dust sheets on the phantom furniture billowing. The hallway entrance where Carver stood narrowed rapidly, the door frame groaning under impossible pressures. "Out, move!" Brick roared, shoving Patch and Mercy towards the kitchen doorway, the only exit still relatively unobstructed. Carver, seeing the hallway closing, spun and sprinted towards the kitchen too. I scrambled after them, the floor tilting beneath my feet. We burst into the kitchen just as the living room doorway slammed shut behind us with a sound like cracking bone. The kitchen itself was transforming. Cupboards flew open, spewing their meager, dusty contents. The sink groaned, pipes bursting, spraying rusty water. The back door, our theoretical escape route, warped and buckled, the wood splintering as the frame constricted. Then the floor dropped out from under Carver. He'd been near the center of the room. One moment he was there, knife drawn, eyes wide with feral alarm. The next, a section of linoleum approximately 6 feet square simply vanished, revealing a dark, gaping hole beneath. He yelled, a choked sound of surprise and terror, and plunged into the darkness. The hole snapped shut instantly, the linoleum pattern seamlessly reforming, leaving no trace he'd ever been there. "Carver!" Patch screamed, lunging towards the spot, but Brick grabbed her arm, hauling her back. "No, it's gone," Brick yelled, his face pale and taut. The kitchen continued its violent transformation. The ceiling lowered menacingly. The appliances, the stove, the ancient refrigerator slid across the floor, crashing into each other. "The pantry!" I yelled, pointing to a narrow door on the far wall. It was our only remaining exit. Brick nodded grimly, pushing Mercy ahead of him. Patch followed, sobbing. I brought up the rear, casting a desperate look back at the spot where Carver had vanished. Had the house killed him, or just relocated him, swallowed him into its impossible depths? We stumbled into the pantry. It was small, lined with empty shelves. The door slammed shut behind us, plunging us into absolute darkness. We were trapped, 4 of us now. Brick, Patch, Mercy, and me, packed into a suffocatingly small space. Silence, except for our ragged breathing and Patch's stifled sobs. The sounds of the house shifting outside the pantry door gradually subsided. "Everyone okay?" Brick asked, his voice strained. "Mercy," Patch's voice trembled. "Sister Agnes." A faint whimper was the only reply. Patch fumbled for her flashlight, clicking it on. Mercy was slumped against the shelves, eyes wide with terror, clutching her rosary so tightly her knuckles were white. "We have to get out," I said, my voice hoarse. I pushed against the door, solid, immovable. Brick tried too, throwing his considerable weight against it. Nothing, blocked or gone. We were sealed in. Panic began to rise again, thick and cloying. "The walls," Patch whispered, shining her light around the small space. "Look." The pantry walls weren't smooth plaster. They were lined with shelves. Empty shelves, yes, but thousands upon thousands of small, uniform, square compartments like a vast, sterile honeycomb, or an empty morgue drawer system. It was deeply unsettling. And the air was changing. That faint ozone and earth smell was intensifying, becoming sharp, metallic, almost painful to breathe. And it was getting colder, rapidly colder. Frost began to bloom on the wooden shelves, sparkling in Patch's flashlight beam. "It's freezing," Brick muttered, rubbing his arms. Mercy started to moan, a low, continuous sound of pure dread. "He is here," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. "The Unmaker, the Lord of empty spaces." Suddenly, Patch gasped, pointing her flashlight beam at one of the walls. A single compartment, previously empty, now held something. A small, intricate object made of ice. It looked familiar. I leaned closer. It was a perfect miniature replica of my tablet, rendered in flawless, transparent ice. Then another compartment filled, an ice sculpture of Patch's wrench, another Brick's axe, another Carver's knife, another Mercy's rosary. The house wasn't just trapping us, it was cataloging us, creating frozen effigies of our tools, our symbols, our very identities. "What does it want?" Patch breathed, backing away. As if in answer, the temperature plummeted further. Our breath plumed in thick white clouds. The frost on the shelves thickened, crawling across the floor, up the walls. My fingers felt numb. Mercy was shivering violently. "We'll freeze to death in here," Brick stated grimly, trying the door again, hammering on it with his fists. It was like hitting solid rock. Then one of the compartments directly in front of me began to change. The empty space within it seemed to darken, not with shadow, but with an absence of light. A pocket of pure, consuming blackness appeared within the small wooden square. It didn't reflect the flashlight beam, it swallowed it. Looking at it made my head swim, a wave of vertigo washing over me. The negative space. The concept flashed in my mind from my earlier brainstorming of potential horrors, an area where something vital is removed. More compartments began to fill with this unnerving darkness, not randomly but in a pattern, forming lines, angles, geometry. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just cataloging us. It was drawing something, using the empty compartments and the pockets of absolute nothingness as its medium, creating a blueprint of despair. It's mapping us, I stammered, the realization hitting me with physical force. Our fears, our objects, it's putting us into its structure. The cold intensified. Mercy collapsed, falling against brick, her shivering becoming weak tremors. Patch knelt beside her, trying to chafe her hands, her own fingers clumsy with cold. The pattern of darkness on the wall grew clearer. It was forming shapes I recognized, warped and distorted. A skewed representation of the house's upper floor. A caricature of the observation room starring I, rendered in pure void. It was showing us its work, showing us how we were being incorporated, digested. Checkmate. The word echoed Carver's earlier cynicism. The house had maneuvered us, separated us, trapped us. It had taken one piece off the board, Carver, and now it was closing in on the rest. We weren't players anymore. We were just pieces, waiting to be frozen, catalogued, and ultimately incorporated into the final, horrifying configuration. The game was over. The house had won. All that was left was the slow, freezing, terrifying endgame. Chapter 6. Desperate Measures. The freezing pantry, the void map forming on the shelves, the chilling realization that we were being cataloged for assimilation. It was a breaking point. Checkmate felt final, but survival instinct, however battered, still flickered. We couldn't just wait to become frozen exhibits in the house's gallery of despair. Brick, I gasped, my own breath plumbing thickly, teeth chattering. The axe, where is it? His eyes, narrowed against the biting cold, flickered with understanding. He patted his belt, then swore. Must have dropped it outside, in the kitchen. A crushing blow. Our best tool for breaking out was gone, likely already assimilated or relocated by the house. Patch looked up from Mercy, her face etched with desperation. Mercy's shivering had almost stopped, her skin pale, lips tinged blue. Hypothermia was setting in fast. We have to get her warm. Now, Brick the door. Brick needed no further urging. He slammed his already bruised shoulder against the pantry door again and again, roaring with effort and pain. The solid wood didn't budge. It felt less like wood, more like frozen iron. It's no good, he finally gasped, slumping against the shelves, the cold leaching his formidable strength. Panic threatened to consume me. Trapped, freezing, Mercy dying, Carver gone. Was this it? I scanned the small, horrifying space, the flashlight beam dancing frantically. The void map continued its slow, deliberate assembly on the wall. The ice sculptures of our belongings gleamed mockingly. Weight the shelves, wood. Old wood may be dry despite the unnatural frost. Patch your flashlight, I croaked, my fingers stiff and clumsy. And anything flammable, anything at all. She understood immediately. While Brick watched Mercy, Patch and I frantically searched our pockets, our meager belongings. A few crumpled tissues from Patch. A half book of matches I'd salvaged weeks ago, maybe 4 or 5 left. My notebook, pages filled with useless maps and terrified scrawls. The shelves, I said, pointing. If we can start a fire, maybe the heat, maybe the smoke, maybe it would force the house to react, to change the configuration again. It was insane. Starting a fire in a confined wooden space while trapped. But it was better than freezing to death while watching a map of our own doom assemble itself in literal nothingness. Patch hesitated for only a second, then nodded grimly. We tore pages from my notebook, ripped strips from the hem of my shirt, gathered the tissues. We piled the tinder against the base of the wooden shelves, away from the spreading void map but near the door. My fingers were almost too numb to strike the match. The first one scraped, flared briefly, and died. The second did the same. My heart pounded. Only 3 left. Patch shielded our pathetic pile of tinder with her body, trying to block any drafts, though the air was deathly still. The third match scraped, caught, a tiny, precious flame. I held it to the edge of a notebook page. It curled, blackened, then caught, the flame spreading greedily to the tissues and cloth strips. Smoke began to curl upwards, thin and acrid at first, then thickening. The small fire crackled, casting flickering, dancing shadows that distorted the horrifying geometry of the shelves. It wasn't much, but it was heat. Blessed heat. We huddled closer, pulling Mercy towards the meager warmth. The smoke thickened rapidly, stinging our eyes, making us cough. The cold air fought against the rising heat, creating strange eddies and currents. "Keep it small," Brick cautioned, his voice hoarse. "Don't want to burn the place down around our ears before we get out, if we got out." The fire began to lick at the base of the shelves themselves. The old wood, despite the frost, caught slowly. The smoke turned blacker, filling the small space. We huddled near the floor, gasping for cleaner air. Did the house notice? Did it care? For long moments, nothing happened except the growing fire, the choking smoke, and the slow, agonizing return of feeling to our frozen extremities. Mercy stirred, coughing weakly. Then a sound, a low, groaning creak, not from the fire but from the door. We froze, looking at it. A thin crack appeared along the door frame, then another. The wood groaned again, louder this time, like a ship's timbers under immense strain. "It's working," Patch gasped, coughing. The door shuddered violently. Then, with a sound like tearing canvas, it warped inwards, bending and splintering, not opening but deforming. Hot, acrid smoke poured out through the widening cracks. Beyond the ruined door, the kitchen wasn't there. It was a wall, a solid wall of rough, pulsating plaster, disturbingly like the texture we'd sometimes felt bulging beneath the wallpaper. The wall stalker's domain. The house hadn't opened the door. It had sealed us in more securely, replacing the door with its own living tissue. But it had also reacted to the fire. It had changed. Desperation clawed at me. We couldn't stay here. The smoke was becoming unbearable. Brick seemed to reach the same conclusion. He grabbed a piece of the burning shelf, a makeshift torch, ignoring the pain as the flames licked his hand. "Stand back," he yelled, his voice muffled by the smoke. He charged at the pulsating plaster wall where the door had been, ramming the burning brand into its surface. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The plaster writhed. A high-pitched screech like tearing metal but somehow organic filled the pantry. The section Brick had struck bubbled and hissed, emitting a foul, steaming stench like burning meat. The wall recoiled, then bulged outwards aggressively towards Brick. He scrambled back, dropping the burning wood. "It's alive." The pulsating wall flowed, parts of it extending like thick plaster pseudopods, feeling blindly into the smoky air of the pantry. The wall stalker wasn't just in the walls. In some places, it was the walls. We were trapped between a fire, suffocating smoke, and a living, hostile wall. "The side," Patch yelled, pointing her flashlight towards one of the pantry's side walls, the one currently not covered in the void map or actively trying to consume us. "Try the side wall." It seemed hopeless. The shelves were solid, the wall behind them presumably just as impenetrable as the others. But what choice did we have? Brick, coughing heavily, grabbed another piece of burning wood. He slammed it against the side shelves. More smoke, more burning wood, but the wall behind remained inert. He hammered at the shelves with his fists, then kicked desperately. A section of shelving cracked, splintered. Behind it wasn't plaster, it was darkness. Not the consuming void of the map, but simple structural darkness. A gap. Working frantically, coughing in the thickening smoke, Brick and I tore at the broken shelves, ripping them away. Patch helped, pulling Mercy back from the encroaching heat and the groping plaster wall. There was a gap, a narrow opening barely shoulder width leading into pitch blackness. It looked like a crawl space or perhaps a ventilation shaft hidden behind the pantry shelves. Had it always been there? Or had the house created it, offering a different kind of trap? "Go, go," Brick urged, shoving Patch towards the opening. "Take Mercy." Patch didn't hesitate. She squeezed into the narrow gap, pulling the semi-conscious Mercy after her with difficulty. They vanished into the blackness. "Glitch, you next," Brick coughed, batting away a tendril of the pulsating plaster that snaked towards him. The fire was spreading rapidly now, the pantry becoming an inferno. I scrambled towards the opening, the heat scorching my back. I squeezed through, the rough edges tearing at my clothes. Brick was right behind me, forcing his larger frame through the narrow space just as the pulsating wall lunged, sealing the opening behind us with a wet, slapping sound. We were out of the pantry, but we were now crawling on our hands and knees in utter darkness, the air thick with dust and the smell of confined spaces. Behind us, the muffled roar of the fire and the enraged screeching of the living wall faded slightly. Ahead, only blackness and the sound of Patch urging Mercy forward. We had escaped the immediate checkmate, but we had plunged ourselves into the guts of the house, into its hidden veins and arteries, a desperate measure born of fire and fear. And as I crawled blindly forward, I had the terrifying certainty that we hadn't escaped the game at all. We had just moved onto a different, darker level of the board. Chapter 7: The Labyrinth's Heart. Crawling through the suffocating blackness felt like being swallowed. The space was tight, restricting, the air thick with ancient dust that coated my throat and lungs. Rough-sawn timbers scraped against my back, unseen pipes snagged at my clothes. Behind us, the muffled sounds of the pantry inferno faded, replaced by the unsettlingly intimate noises of the house's hidden anatomy, creaks, groans, and that persistent, faint rustling, as if the insulation itself were alive and breathing alongside us. Patch's flashlight beam, weak as it was, occasionally cut through the gloom ahead, illuminating brief glimpses of the narrow crawlspace, a claustrophobic tunnel snaking through the house's skeleton. Patch was half carrying, half dragging Mercy, whose condition seemed perilous. Brick crawled behind me, his heavy breathing and muttered curses the only proof he was still there. How long we crawled, I don't know. Time lost meaning in the disorienting darkness. Every turn felt arbitrary, every path identical. Was this space even stable? Or was it shifting around us, subtly redirecting our path, herding us like rats in a maze? My mapping instincts screamed in frustration. Without reference points, without light, I was blind, relying solely on the path immediately ahead. Eventually, the crawl space began to widen, the ceiling rising. We could crouch, then stand hunched over. The air grew slightly fresher, though still laden with dust and that persistent ozone tang. Patch's flashlight beam revealed we were in some kind of service tunnel, maybe between floors or within a double wall. Pipes of unknown function lined the walls, coated in grime and cobwebs thick as shrouds. "Need to rest," Patch gasped, easing Mercy gently to the dusty floor. Mercy was barely conscious, her breathing shallow. Patch checked her pulse, her face grim in the dim light. "She's fatting, Brick. We need to get out of here, find somewhere warm, safe." Safe. The word sounded alien, absurd. Brick leaned against a cluster of pipes, breathing heavily, his face smudged with soot, his eyes scanning the darkness warily. "Any idea where here is, Glitch?" I shook my head, feeling useless. Could be anywhere, between floors, inside an outer wall cavity. These tunnels might not even connect logically to the house we knew. I shone my own salvaged flashlight, retrieved before the pantry fire, down the tunnel in both directions. Endless darkness, punctuated by more pipes and shadows. Which way? Before anyone could answer, a low humming sound started, seeming to resonate through the pipes around us. It grew steadily louder, a deep, vibrational thrum that vibrated in our teeth. The dust motes dancing in our flashlight beams began to swirl, coalescing into strange, fleeting patterns. "What is that?" Patch asked nervously, shielding Mercy. The humming intensified, accompanied by a faint blue light emanating from further down the tunnel, the direction Patch and Mercy had been heading. It pulsed in time with the hum, casting eerie, elongated shadows. Brick pushed himself off the pipes. "Trouble finds us standing still. Let's move towards the light, or away." Away felt smarter, towards the light felt inevitable, like the house was drawing us somewhere. Towards, I decided, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Maybe it's an exit, or maybe it was the spider's parlor. We moved cautiously towards the pulsing blue glow, Brick taking point now, me helping Patch with Mercy, who was little more than dead weight. The humming grew louder, making my skull vibrate. The tunnel opened abruptly into a larger space. It wasn't an exit. It was a chamber, vast and cavernous, utterly incongruous within the confines of a normal house. It felt like we'd stumbled into the house's hidden engine room, or perhaps its heart. The blue light emanated from the center of the chamber, where thick bundles of pipes and wires, coated in the same pulsating, plaster-like substance as the wall that had attacked us, converged on a central, vaguely spherical mass. This central organ throbbed with the blue light, emitting the deep hum. It looked disturbingly organic, like a grotesque, technological heart powering the shifting madness of the structure. Wires snaked out from it, burrowing into the walls and floor like metallic veins. The walls of the chamber weren't plaster or wood. They seemed to be made of compressed debris, scraps of metal, fused plastic, splintered wood, fragments of cloth, all fused together into a solid, meters-thick barrier. Embedded within this gruesome matrix, like fossils in rock, were other objects: a rusted bicycle wheel, a child's doll with one missing eye, a tarnished silver locket, and chillingly, what looked unmistakably like human bones, a ribcage here, a femur there, integrated into the very structure of the house's core. This was where things ended up. The kettle patch lost, Carver, the countless others who must have been trapped here over the years, absorbed, incorporated. "Sweet mother," Mercy whispered, her eyes fluttering open, staring at the pulsating core with horrified understanding. "The heart, the unmaking heart." As we stared, paralyzed by the horrific revelation, movement flickered at the edge of Patch's light beam. From the gaps between the pipes, from crevices in the debris wall, things began to emerge. Geometry rats. Sleek, unnaturally flat rodents scurried out, their eyes gleaming red in the light, moving with impossible speed along the curved surfaces. Skittering insulation, clumps of fibrous material detaching themselves from the walls, scuttling on twitching legs made of frayed wire and dust bunnies. And worse, from a large pipe overhead, something thick and segmented detached itself, landing with a wet slap on the floor near Brick. A pipe leech, easily 3 feet long, its sucker mouth gaping. Brick recoiled, kicking at it instinctively. It hissed, coiling back. More emerged, slithering down the walls. We were surrounded. The house's immune system, its parasitic inhabitants, roused by our intrusion into its vital core. "Back," Brick yelled, shoving us towards the tunnel entrance. "Back the way we came." But the tunnel wasn't there anymore. Where the opening had been, the debris wall was now seamless, the pipes running uninterrupted. The house had sealed our retreat. The humming from the core intensified. The blue light pulsed faster. The creatures advanced. Rats swarmed the floor. Leeches slithered closer. The skittering insulation gathered into larger, vaguely man-shaped masses. And then the wall stalker manifested. Not as a bulge, not as a whisper, but as a towering wave of the pulsating, plaster-like substance detaching itself from the far wall. It flowed across the floor towards us, absorbing rats and insulation creatures into its mass, extending thick, grasping pseudopods. Its surface roiled, and for a horrifying second I saw shapes within it, distorted faces, outstretched hands, trapped remnants of previous victims, subsumed into the house's primary guardian. This was it, the heart of the labyrinth, defended by its monstrous antibodies. Brick stood his ground, surprisingly calm amidst the chaos. He hefted a heavy wrench he'd somehow acquired, likely scavenged from the tunnels. Patch glitch, get Mercy behind that cluster of pipes. Now. We dragged Mercy into the meager cover offered by a junction of large, grime-coated conduits. Patch fumbled with her flashlight, trying to track the swarming creatures. I searched desperately for another exit, another hidden tunnel, anything. There was nothing, just the pulsating heart, the debris walls, and the advancing tide of horrors. Brick met the first wave. He swung the wrench with desperate force, crushing geometry rats, scattering skittering insulation. He kicked away a pipe leech that tried to latch onto his leg, but they were too many. The wall stalker flowed closer, inexorable. It didn't seem to attack Brick directly but flowed around him, its purpose clear: to engulf us, to absorb us, to add us to the debris wall. "The core," I yelled, pointing at the pulsating blue heart. "It's controlling them, we have to stop it." How could we possibly fight that? Then Mercy spoke, her voice surprisingly clear though weak. "Kenji, your tablet, the picture." My tablet, it was gone, lost in the living room chaos. But the backup USB drive, it was still around my neck. And the observation room photo, I see. What did she mean? I fumbled for the drive, my mind racing. The picture, the eye, the house sees. The creatures were closing in. The wall stalker loomed. Brick was tiring, overwhelmed. I looked at the pulsating core, at the wires snaking out, at the debris wall filled with absorbed victims. The house saw through its victims. It learned through them. It fed on them. Maybe it could be overloaded, blinded. It was insane. A desperate gamble based on a dying woman's cryptic words and my own fractured theories. But it was the only chance we had. "Patch, your flashlight, shine it right at the core, keep it steady," I yelled, pulling the USB drive from my neck. I didn't have my tablet, but I had the drive, the data. The house fed on information, on observation. What if I fed it garbage? What if I fed it noise? What if I tried to glitch it? I didn't have a port, didn't have a screen, but the wires. Thick bundles of them snaked across the floor towards the core. Raw data conduits, power lines, didn't matter. While Patch held the beam steady on the pulsating blue heart, distracting the swarm momentarily, and Brick fought like a cornered bear, I scrambled towards the nearest thick cable bundle. I found frayed insulation, exposed copper strands. Holding my breath, praying this wouldn't just electrocute me, I jammed the metal end of the USB drive against the exposed wires. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the humming from the core stuttered. The blue light flickered erratically. A shower of sparks erupted from the point of contact. The creatures hesitated. The geometry rats squealed, confused. The pipe leeches recoiled. The wall stalker paused its advance, its surface churning violently. "It's working," Patch shouted. The core hummed furiously, pulsing wildly between blinding blue and absolute darkness. The entire chamber seemed to vibrate. Cracks appeared in the debris wall. Then, with a deafening screech that wasn't electronic but sounded like tortured metal and tearing flesh combined, the core pulsed one final time, blindingly bright, and went dark. The humming stopped. The chamber plunged into near-total darkness, relieved only by Patch's flashlight and the dying sparks from the USB drive, which glowed red-hot in my hand. A silence. The creatures were gone, vanished, retreated back into the walls. The wall stalker had collapsed into a formless, inert puddle of plaster-like goo. Had we done it, had we killed the house, disabled its heart? Brick sagged against the pipes, dropping the wrench with a clang. Patch rushed to Mercy, who had slumped down again, unconscious. I pulled the smoking USB drive away from the wires, my hand throbbing. The chamber was dark, silent, and suddenly felt inert. Just a strange, debris-filled room deep within a dead structure. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw something wasn't right. The darkness wasn't just the absence of the core's light. It felt deeper, more absolute. The walls seemed further away than before, the space vaster, and the silence wasn't peaceful. It was the profound, listening silence of something gathering its strength. We hadn't killed the house. We had just very foolishly broken its heart. And now we were trapped in the echoing silence, waiting to see what form its rage would take. The checkmate hadn't been averted. The board had just been wiped clean for a new, more terrifying game. Chapter 8: No Exit. The silence that followed the disabling of the heart was worse than the humming, worse than the skittering and screeching. It was a heavy, profound silence that pressed in on us, amplifying the sound of our own ragged breaths, the frantic thumping of our own hearts. The chamber remained dark, Patch's flashlight beam cutting a lonely swathe through the oppressive gloom, illuminating the inert puddle of wall stalker goo and the dead, silent core. "Is it over?" Patch asked, her voice echoing unnervingly in the vast space. Brick straightened up, his face grim. "Don't think so, feels wrong." He retrieved his wrench, hefting it warily. He was right, the house didn't feel dead, it felt, paused, watching. The very air seemed thick with anticipation. We had struck a blow, yes, but we hadn't killed the beast. We'd only wounded it, enraged it. Mercy was unresponsive. Patch worked frantically, checking her pulse, trying to rouse her. "She's ice cold, Brick, faint pulse. We need to get out, now." But where? The tunnel we'd entered through was gone, sealed seamlessly into the debris wall. I scanned the perimeter with my own flickering flashlight. Nothing. Just the solid, impenetrable wall embedded with the gruesome remnants of past victims. "There's no way out," I said, the words tasting like ash. "It sealed us in when we came through." Brick struck the wall with his wrench. The sound was dull, final, solid. "Then we make one." He swung again, harder. A few fragments of embedded debris chipped off, but the wall itself remained unyielding. As he struck a third time, the house responded. Not with creatures, not with noise, but with a subtle, chilling shift in the very fabric of the chamber. The darkness deepened. Patch's flashlight beam seemed to shorten, unable to penetrate as far as before. The walls seemed to recede, then flow inwards, the vast chamber shrinking around us with agonizing slowness. The floor beneath our feet began to feel soft, spongy, like packed earth or something worse. "It's changing again," Patch gasped, backing away from the walls, pulling Mercy with her. The inert puddle of wall stalker goo began to stir. Not reforming, but sinking into the softening floor, absorbed like water into sand. The dead core didn't reactivate, but the wires connected to it began to writhe like snakes, burrowing into the walls and floor, vanishing from sight. The house wasn't repairing itself. It was dissolving, deconstructing this chamber, reclaiming its components. And the walls, dear God, the walls. As the chamber shrank, the embedded objects, the bones, the doll, the locket became more prominent, and they began to move, not detaching but shifting within the matrix. The ribcage seemed to flex. The doll's remaining eye swiveled, fixing on us. The bones scraped against the debris, emitting faint whispers that sounded disturbingly like names. Voices of the absorbed, stirred into a final, horrifying chorus by the house's transformation. "This isn't an engine room," I choked out, backing towards the center of the shrinking space. "It's a stomach, a graveyard, and it's digesting." The floor became softer still, yielding under our weight. It wasn't earth. It was composed of compressed layers of dust, hair, cloth fibers, and God knows what else, the accumulated detritus of countless victims. And it was pulling us down. My feet sank inches deep. Brick struggled to maintain his footing. "We're sinking," Patch cried out, trying desperately to keep Mercy's head above the encroaching filth. Brick abandoned his futile attack on the wall and grabbed Mercy under the arms, trying to haul her up. But he too was sinking, the floor clinging to his boots like quicksand. The whispers from the walls grew louder, a cacophony of despair, fragments of forgotten lives swirling around us. The chamber continued its slow, inexorable constriction. Soon there would be no space left. We would be compressed, absorbed, becoming part of the shifting, digesting fabric of the house itself, added to the wall. This was the end game. Not freezing, not being torn apart by creatures, but slow, suffocating absorption, becoming one with the monster. Is this what happened to Carver? Did the floor swallow him whole, pulling him down into this digestive tract? Despair washed over me, cold and final. My desperate gamble with the core had only delayed the inevitable, perhaps even hastened this final, ghastly transformation. There was no escape, no exit. The house always won. Brick roared, a sound of pure primal defiance against the inevitable. He strained, pulling Mercy upwards, fighting the sucking floor. Patch clung to Mercy, trying to help, tears streaming down her face. I looked at the shrinking walls, at the whispering, shifting bones. I looked at my friends, my fellow prisoners, sinking into the accumulated horror of this place. My mapping, my logic, my attempts to understand, all utterly meaningless. No pattern. Only walls. The house had told me from the beginning. The walls were barely yards away now. The whispering was deafening. The floor sucked greedily at my knees. Brick grunted, losing his battle, sinking deeper with Mercy. Patch sobbed beside him. This is how it ends. Not with a bang, but with a slow, silent absorption into the hungry architecture of madness. Lost. Forgotten. Another layer in the house's accreted history of suffering. My flashlight flickered one last time, the beam catching a glint of metal in the wall nearby, the tarnished silver locket embedded amongst the bones. It seemed to pulse faintly, catching the dying light. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a face reflected in its surface. A face I didn't recognize. Sad, resigned, welcoming me to the collection. Then the flashlight died, plunging us into the final, consuming darkness. The whispers enveloped us. The floor pulled us down. The walls closed in. No exit, only the house, forever. The end.